She was just a college kid on a plane. Quiet, thoughtful, sitting in his seat like everyone else. But when a flight attendant slapped him mid-air, accusing him of being loud and threatening, the world gasped for one reason. He was the son of a billionaire. What would have happened if he wasn't? If no one knew his name, if there were no cameras, no headlines. As the plane touched down, the fallout had only begun. A single phone call would shake the airline industry to its core, spark national outrage, and reveal a truth that had been ignored far too long. But this isn't just about wealth or power. It's about perception, assumption, and how one young man chose stillness over rage and turned silence into a movement. So buckle in, because this is more than just a flight. This is a story about dignity, identity, and the invisible weight too many carry through the skies. Would you have spoken up? Would you have seen him for who he truly was? Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. And now, let's begin the journey that changed everything. The plane hummed steadily at cruising altitude, 36,000 feet above sea level. The clouds outside the windows glowed orange with the fading sunlight. But inside the first-class cabin of Skybridge Flight 927, the air had turned cold and electric. Passengers froze. Conversations died mid-sentence. One man removed his headphones in confusion. A child stopped coloring. All eyes turned toward row 2A, where a 17-year-old boy sat motionless, his jaw clenched and one cheek burning red. He didn't speak. Not right away. Across from him, a flight attendant with sharp features and blonde hair tucked tightly into a regulation bun stood stiff, her breathing shallow, her hands trembling, still raised slightly in the air. Silence consumed the aisle, the kind of silence that descends after something has broken. The slap had echoed like a gunshot in a chapel. Then came the whispers. "Oh my God. Did she just hit him? Was that the flight attendant? What the hell is going on?" Phones emerged from coat pockets and handbags, tilted discreetly toward the unfolding scene. The boy composed, despite the flush of embarrassment warming his skin, looked up slowly. His brown eyes scanned the faces watching, the hands gripping seat armrests, the smartphones already recording. Then, without raising his voice, he said calmly, "I want to call my father." The flight attendant blinked, her face now pale beneath her makeup. "Sir." "Deumau." Didn't mean he didn't look at her. He turned to the captain standing nearby, who had just stepped out from the cockpit amid the commotion. "Please," the boy said, "connect me to ground communications. I need to speak to my father immediately." The captain, a tall man with silver at his temples and lines carved deep into his forehead, hesitated. "We're in the air," he said. "We can't." The boy spoke again, gently but firmly. "My name is Noah Salas. My father is Dr. Everett Salas." A beat of stunned silence passed through the cabin. Then a passenger in business attire let out an audible gasp. A woman behind him dropped her magazine. The captain blinked, as in Green Corps systems. Noah gave a single, slow nod. The captain turned toward the cockpit without another word. Lana Bristow could barely breathe. She stared at her own hand, as if it no longer belonged to her. Her wrist was still faintly vibrating from the movement swift, unthinking, defensive. She hadn't meant to slap him. It had been a reaction, a mistake, a terrible, irreversible mistake. She looked at Noah now. Not angry, not crying, not even shaking. Just still, solid, and calm. His skin was smooth, youthful. His suit was modest, clean. He looked like someone raised with poise, someone taught to think before reacting. He had done nothing threatening. He had only held that prescription bottle and spoken a few words she hadn't even heard properly, before her body had decided wrongly that he was a threat. She had seen something in that moment, but what not a person, a suspicion, a blur of race, youth, and instinctive fear. And now, he had said the name, Dr. Everett Salas. Everyone in aviation had heard it. A billionaire tech mogul, creator of one of the world's most influential environmental AI networks, frequent guest on political panels, a black man who had once turned down a presidential cabinet position to continue his research in Vermont. A quiet man, but known for his unflinching responses to injustice. And she had just struck his son, in the cockpit. The satellite phone connection crackled faintly. The captain cleared his throat. "Sir, I have your son on board. There's been an incident. I need you to understand the gravity of the voice that came through was steady, cold, and deliberate. And I need you to understand," said Dr. Everett Salas, "that one of your crew just assaulted my son. That aircraft isn't going anywhere until I have answers. On the line," the captain swallowed hard, "we have 214 passengers on board, sir, and one of them is my child. I suggest you hold position." Noah remained seated. The handprint on his cheek had faded, but the heat beneath his skin stayed. He glanced out the window toward a sky he had once found peaceful. Now, it felt like a mirror. Up here, at 36,000 feet, you could see everything so clearly, even the things people tried to hide, even the faces people made when they saw you. He exhaled slowly, willing the growing ache in his chest to stay where it was. No drama, no tears. His father would handle it. He always did. But still, something in him felt heavier than anger. He didn't want anyone fired. He didn't want to be a headline. He just wanted to be a boy with a presentation waiting for him in Stanford. Instead, he had become the storm, 4 hours earlier. The boarding call for Skybridge Flight 927 echoed softly through the vaulted ceilings of Kennedy International. But Noah Salas had already been seated for 10 minutes. He preferred to board early not for privilege, but for quiet. Row 2A was tucked beside the window, just behind the first-class divider curtain. It gave him just enough room to stretch his legs and just enough distance from the crew to avoid unnecessary small talk. Noah pulled out his headphones, tapped through his jazz playlist, and chose a track with soft saxophone undercurrents. The music filled his ears gently, giving him space to think. His left hand rested over a slim folio case beside him inside. The printed version of his Stanford Environmental Symposium proposal. He was presenting tomorrow, solo, for the first time. His father wouldn't be there. Urgent business in Vermont had pulled him away. But Noah wasn't bitter. The two of them had already spent weeks preparing for the presentation. Everett Salas believed in empowering his son with responsibility, not guarding him in glass. As the cabin slowly filled with the rustle of designer coats, laptop bags, and the soft sighs of seasoned travelers, Noah leaned his head against the window and watched the service trucks move around the aircraft like ants in high-vis vests. He didn't quite blend in here. He was used to that. In first class, he was always the youngest, often the only black passenger. People looked twice. Some smiled, others didn't. But he'd been taught how to wear silence like armor. His father had made sure of that. Privacy, his father once told him, isn't about isolation. It's about preservation. They were sitting on a lakeside dock at the time. Noah remembered the sun flaring behind his father's silhouette, the echo of dragonflies skimming the water. People like us, Everett had said gently, don't get the benefit of anonymity. So we must learn to be intentional with our presence, when to be visible, when to be still, when to listen more than we speak." Noah had nodded back then. He was 13, maybe 14, just old enough to understand what his father meant, not yet old enough to carry the full weight of it. Now, at 17, he was starting to understand the difference between being quiet and being made silent. "Would you like a beverage?" Sir Noah pulled one headphone aside. The flight attendant was middle-aged, with tightly pinned blonde hair, a polite smile, and a name tag that read Lana. She looked like she hadn't slept much. "Just water, please," Noah replied, his voice soft. "Coming right up." Her tone was efficient but distant. Noah didn't take it personally. He watched her pour from a glass bottle behind the service curtain, her movements precise. She had probably done this 1,000 times, maybe more. First class was familiar to her in a way it wasn't yet to him. She handed him the water without looking directly at his eyes. Then she moved on. A few rows behind him, there was a soft cough and the sound of struggling fabric. Noah turned slightly. An older woman, probably in her 70s, was trying to lift a compact oxygen tank into the overhead compartment. Her hand trembled slightly as she struggled with the weight. Without thinking, Noah rose from his seat. "I've got that," he said, gently placing his hand under the tank and easing it upward into the compartment. The woman smiled. Out of breath. "Thank you, sweetheart. It's heavier than it looks." "My pleasure," Noah said. "Do you need anything else?" She touched her chest lightly, as if searching for reassurance, then pulled a small prescription bottle from her coat pocket. "No, I'm all right now. Just needed this nearby." She tucked it into the seat pocket in front of her, and Noah nodded before returning to his seat. A small gesture. Nothing more, but Lana saw it from the galley. She watched him help. Saw the bottle in the old woman's hand. Filed it away. Back in row 2A. Noah tapped his fingers on the tray table, thinking about tomorrow. The environmental monitoring project he was presenting had been his own idea, sparked during a family hiking trip in the Cascades 2 years ago. He'd noticed a dry stream bed where one shouldn't have been. A single idea took root. What if climate threats could be seen before they happened? Using AI and satellite data, he spent a year building a prototype under his father's mentorship, and another year testing it in partnership with Green Corps' labs. Tomorrow, Stanford's Department of Earth Sciences would listen to his pitch. He should have been nervous. He wasn't. Not really. Instead, he felt something else. The need to prove he belonged. As the final passengers boarded, the captain's voice came through the speakers. A gravelly, seasoned tone. "Good afternoon, folks. This is Captain Trent Lowe, welcoming you aboard Skybridge Flight 927, nonstop to San Francisco. Flight time approximately 5 hours. Weather looks favorable for most of the route. Please sit back, relax, and enjoy the flight." Noah took a long sip of his water. He glanced around the cabin once more. The woman he'd helped was reading a novel now. Lana was busy checking overhead bins. A businessman beside him scrolled through stock prices. Everything looked normal, but normal doesn't always mean safe. He tucked his headphones back in. The saxophone returned. Tomorrow would come soon enough. Lana Bristow hadn't meant to fly today. She had traded shifts last minute to cover for a junior attendant whose child had spiked a fever. Lana could have said no. She wanted to say no. But the extra shift came with overtime pay, and she needed every dollar. Her mortgage grace period expired in 6 days. Her daughter's college deposit was due in 2 weeks. Her knees were killing her. And the airline had just sent out a veiled memo last Friday. All senior staff should be aware that performance reviews are now part of operational cost assessments. She knew what that meant, They wanted her gone. 24 years in the air. 24 years of pushing carts down narrow aisles, dealing with drunks, medical scares, first-time flyers, screaming toddlers, and the ever-tightening smile of customer service. And now, they were tightening the leash. One mistake away from early retirement without benefits. So she straightened her spine. She smiled, even when it hurt. And she walked onto Skybridge Flight 927 like a soldier going back to battle. The first-class cabin today looked like any other. A few tech types with sleek backpacks and smooth watches. One couple dressed like they lived at the gym, and the usual mix of silent suits and impatient laptop warriors. Then she noticed him. Row 2A, young, black, alone. He wore a dark blue sport coat, well-fitted, carried no obvious brand luggage, no bling, no loudness. But Lana had learned not to be fooled by quiet years ago on a red-eye from Chicago. A clean-cut teen had quietly slipped a wallet from a sleeping woman's purse during meal service. Another time, a college-aged passenger had charmed the entire crew before being caught stuffing hotel miniatures into his bag. She wasn't prejudiced, she told herself. She was observant. As the flight leveled off above the cloud line, Lana moved down the aisle with practiced steps, offering beverages and warm towels. When she approached row 2A, the boy Noah, she'd heard him say earlier, accepted his water with quiet gratitude. He didn't smile, just nodded, polite, withdrawn. She didn't notice anything strange until an hour later, as she walked past again to check seat belts. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw him standing near an elderly woman, seat fork assisting her with her overhead bag. At first, she was impressed. He was gentle, respectful, but as she passed, something in her chest tightened. The woman handed Noah a small pill bottle. It was quick, barely noticeable. He tucked it into his hand and moved back toward his seat. A flicker of suspicion lit in Lana's chest. It wasn't just instinct. It was experience. 3 years ago, a teenager had helped an elderly man to his seat in business class. She'd thought it sweet at first until the man's prescription medication disappeared an hour later. It had taken weeks for the paperwork and months for Lana to stop second-guessing herself. No one had believed her, not until the security footage surfaced. She wasn't going to let that happen again. So she watched. Over the next 30 minutes, she made several passes by row 2A, each time glancing at the boy's hands, his tray table, the seat pocket. No sign of the bottle. Her breath caught a little tighter. She told herself she wasn't jumping to conclusions. She was just monitoring, being cautious, being responsible. But the voices in her head began to build momentum. He's alone. That's unusual in first class. He looks young. Could be immature. Could be reckless. Why take a pill bottle? Lana didn't know his name. She didn't know he was Noah Solace, to one of the most influential green technology fortunes in the world. She didn't know he was headed to Stanford to pitch a tool that could forecast droughts and save lives. She didn't know anything, but she thought she saw enough. As she poured coffee for a passenger in 3D, Lana's eyes flicked back once more. Noah was writing something in a leather folio. Suppose there it was, a pill bottle, small, orange, familiar. He placed it on the tray for a second, perhaps unaware. The name on the label wasn't his. It read, Dolores Ray. Lana's heart clenched. A name she recognized from the flight manifest, the elderly woman. And in that moment, a fog of frustration swept through her. All the things she hadn't said when her manager passed her over last month. All the slights she'd absorbed from smug passengers. All the time she had bitten her tongue when someone patted her shoulder like a servant. They weren't Noah's fault, but somehow his presence pulled it all into focus. "What are you doing with her medication? Kid, who do you think you are?" Smiling like nothing happened. "Don't test me. Not today." She approached his seat. "Noah, is it?" she asked. "Voice even?" He looked up, surprised. "Yes, that bottle," she said, pointing. "Where did you get that?" He blinked. "Oh, Miss..." Ray dropped it earlier. "I was helping her stow her oxygen tank, and did she give it to you?" Lana pressed. He paused. "No, not exactly. I think she..." "Please hand it to me," she said, sharper now. He picked it up and extended it, a little confused. Before she could stop herself, Lana reached out, not for the bottle but for his wrist. Her fingers closed around it. The boy froze. His eyes narrowed. Then, instinctively, he pulled back. And in the next moment, the one that would define everything that followed, Lana's palm lifted and struck him across the face. The sound wasn't loud, but it cut through the cabin like a needle. Gasps. Silence. Then the slow burn of disbelief rising across every row. Noah didn't retaliate. He didn't speak. He simply stared at her, eyes wide, but not with rage, with clarity. And what Lana saw in that gaze shook her more than any shout ever could. It was the look of someone who had been here before, someone who knew the playbook. The sting on his cheek was already fading, but the echo of the slap lingered long after the hand came down, long after the silence fell. Noah Salas sat perfectly still in row 2A, his palms resting lightly on his thighs, his breath measured like he'd been trained. Eyes forward, chin slightly raised. He didn't cry, didn't shout. He knew better. His father had once told him, "There are two ways they'll try to make you disappear: by silencing you, or by baiting you to roar." So Noah had learned how to stay still, how to own a room with restraint, how to let the weight of injustice settle without surrendering to it. But inside, beneath that practiced calm, a different storm was rising. He was not okay. Around him, the cabin was still reeling. A woman near the bulkhead had put her hand over her mouth. A teenager across the aisle had stopped mid-text and now held her phone sideways, recording in silence. A man in 3A muttered something. Noah couldn't catch the words, but the tone was disapproving. And the flight attendant, Lana Bristow, stood frozen in the aisle, her face pale, lips parted as if even she didn't understand what she had just done. He could feel it. The eyes, the questions forming in people's heads. What did he do? Did she really hit him? Was it a misunderstanding? Did he provoke her? The same questions that always got asked when the person struck didn't look like the person expected to be a victim. Captain Trent Lowe emerged from the cockpit, alerted by the murmuring and flickers of panic. He scanned the cabin and locked eyes with Lana. She didn't speak, didn't explain. Noah's voice broke the silence. "I'd like to call my father," he said, calmly. "Now." Captain Lowe hesitated. "Son, we're still midair. You can patch through," Noah said. "Secure line. Use the satellite system. You have it for emergency escalation." Captain Lowe looked startled. "Who?" "Noah Salas," he said again, deliberately. "My father is Dr. Everett Salas." Someone gasped aloud. Another dropped their phone in their lap. And just like that, the whispers changed pitch. They weren't wondering what he'd done anymore. They were wondering who he was. But that didn't comfort Noah. It made him feel worse. Why did he have to name drop for them to believe he hadn't deserved it? Why did it take his father's wealth to shift suspicion off his back? A minute ago, he was just a teenage black boy who might have stolen something. Now, he was Dr. Solace's son, and suddenly people saw the slap differently. What do you see when you see me? That question beat steadily in his chest like a second pulse. Would any of them have cared if his last name didn't carry weight? Would they have stayed quiet if he hadn't spoken calmly? What if he had shouted, raised his voice? Would they have filmed then, or just watched? Noah wasn't angry at Lana. Not yet. He was angry at how familiar this all felt. His mind drifted to a moment 3 years ago. He had been walking home from school in Vermont. A patrol car slowed beside him. A window rolled down. The officer smiled, but not with his eyes. "Where are you headed?" Kid Noah had answered politely. "You sure you're from around here?" He had answered again. And when the car finally drove off, without apology, without cause, Noah had walked the rest of the way home without telling his father. But Everett knew. Later that night, Everett sat across from him at the dinner table, his voice low. "You don't have to carry it alone," he said, "but you do have to carry it." Noah had nodded then, but it hadn't sunk in until now. In the cabin, Lana Bristow backed away toward the galley, her hands trembling. She hadn't spoken since the slap. She watched Noah from a distance, watched how calm he remained, how deeply uncomfortable everyone else was. She didn't know what to say. Her thoughts raced. It was a mistake. I panicked. He jerked his arm. Maybe it was a reflex, but deep down, she knew. It wasn't just a reflex. It was fear. It was a lifetime of buried assumptions. It was every silent bias she had never unlearned. She thought she saw a threat. She acted. And now, she saw something she'd never expected to see in her victim. Composure, clarity, power. And that terrified her more than anything. Back in his seat, Noah tapped the side of his folio, forcing himself to focus. Tomorrow, he was supposed to talk about AI climate prediction, about using satellite imagery to spot early signs of drought and prevent entire communities from going thirsty. He was supposed to present a vision of the future. But now, he was back in a pattern as old as time. A black boy mistaken, a white hand reacting, and the world watching, waiting for context before deciding if it mattered. He thought about saying something out loud. He thought about standing, but no. He would let the call to his father do the talking. Let the silence convict her. Captain Lowe returned 10 minutes later. His voice had changed. So had his posture. "We've been instructed to maintain holding altitude and reroute to a neutral landing point. Communications are ongoing with legal." He didn't say who's legal. He didn't need to. Lana was ordered to remain off duty for the remainder of the flight. Another attendant took over service. And Noah. He simply looked out the window, past the clouds, past the horizon, toward a future he wasn't sure would ever really arrive. Time didn't stop. It twisted, slowed into a molasses-like haze where sound became distant, and every heartbeat felt like a drum against bone. It began with a gesture. Noah Solace, seated in row 2A, had just handed back the bottle of medication, his fingers open, his face calm. He was trying to explain himself, but Lana Bristow, flustered, exhausted, scared, didn't hear him. She saw the bottle. She saw the name on it, Dolores Rayand. She saw the boy holding it. The bottle dropped into her palm. But it wasn't enough. Her breath was shallow, her muscles tight, and her eyes didn't see Noah as he was. They saw someone else, someone imagined, someone threatening. Her hand rose. Her voice didn't. The slap came from nowhere. It wasn't loud, but it carried years. The sound was crisp, like a leather strap snapping. And just like that, reality caught up. Noah didn't flinch, but his jaw tightened, and his head turned half an inch with the force. A soft gasp slipped from his lips, inaudible to most. He blinked once, then stared at her. There was no shouting, no retaliation, just a profound, paralyzing stillness. And then a silence fell over the cabin that wasn't silence at all. It was attention. Hundreds of micro-reactions surged at once. A couple 2 rows back exchanged alarmed glances. A man to the right leaned into the aisle. A child clutched their juice box tighter. No one moved. Even Lana didn't. Noah slowly reached up to touch his cheek. The warmth there wasn't just physical. It burned from within shame, injustice, and something older, something inherited. He didn't speak right away. Instead, his eyes scanned the cabin, looking for someone, anyone, who might say something. But people only stared, or looked away. And in that suspended moment, he felt something ancient settle in his bones. You're not allowed to be the victim unless they decide you are. Lana finally broke the silence. Barely. He grabbed, she started, then stopped herself. Noah stood. He didn't raise his voice. "I need to speak to the captain," he said clearly. Then, a beat later, "I need to speak to my father." It wasn't a threat. It wasn't a tantrum. It was a line in the sand. And it shifted the air in the room. From the cockpit, Captain Trent Lowe appeared. His face pinched, his brows pulled tight. He had flown 11,000 hours. He had handled turbulence, diverted landings, and near misses. But nothing in his training had prepared him for this, a teenage boy standing with dignity. A print of a slap across his face, a flight attendant frozen mid-denial, and a cabin full of passengers waiting some recording, others just trying to breathe. Noah turned to him and said again, "My name is Noah Salas. My father is Dr. Everett Salas." Captain Lowe's spine stiffened. There were names you recognized instantly. Dr. Salas wasn't just a billionaire. He was a public intellectual, a corporate force, a quiet man who rarely gave interviews. But when he did, the world listened. The captain stepped back into the cockpit, gave the communications team a nod, and initiated a secure satellite call. Within 90 seconds, a voice came on the line. "Captain Lowe," came the baritone voice, calm and controlled. "This is Everett Salas. I understand there's been an incident." The captain explained what he could, carefully, vaguely, but the voice on the other end didn't flinch. "I expect that aircraft to remain in holding pattern until I receive full accountability," Dr. Salas said. Captain Lowe responded professionally, but the room seemed smaller after that. Lana was quietly removed from service by another attendant. She didn't protest. Back in row 2A, Noah finally sat again, but nothing felt the same. The seat cradled him like an empty promise. The clouds outside looked less like dreams and more like smoke. He turned his gaze down toward his hands. They were still, but inside, he was unraveling. Why didn't anyone speak up? Would it have been different if I looked different? If I wasn't Dr. Salas's son, would they have let it go? He wasn't angry at the slap. He was angry at how familiar it felt. Not physically, but spiritually, emotionally. He had studied stories like this in textbooks, watched footage, written essays about bias, perception, and racial disparity in modern institutions. But here, at 36,000 feet, it wasn't theory. It was him. Lana sat in the back galley, staring at her own hands. They didn't look like weapons. They looked like they always had veined, calloused, aging. But that hand had moved. That hand had struck a child. No, not a child. A young man. And not because he threatened her, but because something inside her recoiled when it didn't need to. She hadn't seen Noah. She'd seen a dozen fears projected onto him. She thought of her daughter, Ellie, back home, same age, same intellect, same quiet strength. Would she have ever struck Ellie? Would she have assumed the worst? The shame came in waves tangled in her throat, curling behind her ribs like smoke. She knew she had changed her own story forever. And she wasn't the only one watching it unfold. Noah pulled out his folio again. His fingers shook, not from fear, but from frustration. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. He wasn't here to be a symbol. He just wanted to present his project, shake a few hands, and show people that data could see droughts before they dried rivers. That artificial intelligence could be used for good. Instead, he was back in a story that wasn't his to begin with, but had somehow always been waiting for him. What do you see when you see me? The question pulsed louder now. And for the first time, he began to wonder, what do I see when I see myself? The sun had barely crested the Vermont tree line when Dr. Everett Salas stood at the floor-to-ceiling window of his lakefront home, clutching a cup of coffee he'd long forgotten to sip. His phone sat on the marble counter, glowing silently. A call had come through 40 minutes ago, from Captain Trent Lowe, from Skybridge Flight 927. The captain hadn't said much, only that there had been an incident. But then came the words that froze time. Your son, Noah. He's okay. But a flight attendant struck him. Everett had known fear before. He'd stood at boardroom tables surrounded by men who tried to strip his patents from him, calling his vision too radical. He'd walked into conferences where he was the only black face in a sea of polished smiles. He'd debated in front of Congress, where his voice was questioned more than his data. But this was different. This was Noah, his boy, his quiet, brilliant, observant son. The one who had taught himself code at age 10, who hiked with a journal and named clouds, who believed in making things better rather than louder. To imagine someone raising a hand to him on an airplane, in front of strangers without cause. It wasn't just violence. It was betrayal. Everett didn't shout. He didn't rage. He did what powerful men do when they've been wounded in a way that history has prepared them for. He moved with precision. His first call was to his general counsel, Lucia Mendez, a former DOJ litigator and the sharpest mind in any room. The second was to Jillian Hart, head of PR strategy for Solace Tech, Everett's company. Then a third to Congresswoman Raina Ellis, whose recent hearings on airline discrimination had barely scratched the surface of systemic bias in the aviation industry. And finally, he tapped into his secure command line, opened a back-channel server, and began logging the full manifest of Flight 927. Every name, every seat, every flight attendant on duty. Not because he wanted revenge, but because he wanted truth. Truth documented, truth witnessed, truth unedited. An hour later, the legal team was mobilized. A media blackout request had already been breached. Someone had posted a blurry video of the slap on X, formerly Twitter. It was climbing fast. Hashtags. Flight 7. Noah Salas. He did nothing. The video was less than 30 seconds, but it said everything. Everett sat down at his kitchen table and stared at the photo of Noah taped to his fridge taken last spring, during a river cleanup event. Noah wore a volunteer vest, his shoes covered in mud, grinning ear to ear. I found frog eggs. Dad, he'd said that day. eyes glowing. How do you raise a child that gentle? Only to have the world treat him as dangerous. The pain wasn't just personal. It was generational. Lucia called back with updates. Skybridge Airlines is scrambling. Their legal team's requesting a quiet resolution. I've already said no. Good, Everett said softly. They'll try to paint it as a misunderstanding. Lana Bristow's record is clean. No prior complaints. She put her hand on my son. Yes, Lucia said. And it's on video. I'm coordinating with the FAA and the airline's executive committee now. Everett exhaled slowly. And the pilot, he asked. Cooperative? Professional? He escalated quickly. He did the right thing. Everett said, almost to himself. He stood and walked to his study. Sat at the same desk where he'd written the white paper that saved 3 coastal cities from water mismanagement. Just last year. But this wasn't science. This was legacy. He opened his laptop, drafted a single-line email to Skybridge Airlines CEO. Subject 927. Body, we don't settle in silence. You'll speak, or we will. He hit send. Then, for the first time in hours, he closed his eyes. In the quiet of the study, Everett let himself feel what he didn't show the world. Shame. Not shame of his son, but shame that he'd sent him into a world that still hadn't changed fast enough. A world where being composed, brilliant, well-dressed, and even his son wasn't enough to keep a hand from flying toward his face. He remembered what his own father once told him after Everett was pulled from a cab by NYPD for matching a description. They don't see you. They see the version of you they fear. Stay sharp. Stay calm. But don't ever stay small. And now, he had to decide what that meant for Noah. His phone buzzed. A text from Jillian, his PR lead. The story's breaking. It's going national. Noah's trending. Another buzz. A text from Noah himself. Just 4 words, I'm okay. Just tired. Everett stared at the screen. Typed back, I'm with you, all the way. Then he closed the laptop, walked to the window, and whispered to the empty morning air. Let them come. This time, we speak. The plane hadn't landed yet, but something had changed. The slap still vibrated in the air, like a bell that refused to stop ringing. Noah Solis remained in row 2A, head turned slightly toward the window knot to admire the view, but to avoid the weight of eyes that couldn't decide if they pitied him or feared him. Silence had become his shield again, but it was different now. This wasn't the silence of comfort. It was the kind that crept through the cabin like fog-thick, unspoken, complicity-laced. Passengers looked his way, then quickly turned back. Some tapped nervously on their phones. Others busied themselves with untouched meals. A few still whispered behind open magazines, pretending the hum of the engine muffled their words. But Noah could feel them, watching, judging, shifting. Not because he had done anything wrong, but because he had broken the rules of invisibility. He had been seen, and they didn't know how to carry that. Then came a voice. Soft, southern, older. Mind if I sit a moment? Noah looked up. It was Dolores Ray, the elderly woman he had helped with her oxygen tank earlier. She leaned gently on the seat in front of him, eyes kind but heavy with sadness. He blinked, surprised. Of course. She settled into the seat beside him, folding her hands in her lap. I wanted to say thank you, she said, and I wanted to say I saw everything. Noah said nothing at first. He didn't know how. Dolores took her time, letting the silence stretch without pressure. Back in Alabama, when I was a child, she continued, My mother used to tell me, there'll be days when truth walks into a room and still no one looks up. This feels like one of those days. Noah turned toward her. You helped me, she said. You were kind, gentle, and that woman. Her voice caught. She didn't see you. Not really. Noah's throat tightened. People like her, she said softly. They're taught fear in small doses, spoon-fed prejudice, enough to act on instinct without ever knowing why. He didn't know what to say. So he asked quietly, Why are you saying this to me? Dolores smiled faintly. Because staying quiet hasn't done us much good. Has it? At that moment, the curtain at the front of first class rustled open. A different flight attendant, Marcus Troy. Young, biracial, clearly new stepped in, tray in hand. Mr. Salas, he said carefully. Can I bring you anything? Noah shook his head. Marcus hesitated, then leaned down. For what it's worth, he said in a low voice. A few of us in the crew saw it. We're writing official statements, quietly, but it's happening. Noah looked up, startled. Marcus continued, his voice tight with emotion. You shouldn't have to be someone's son for people to care. But if that's what it takes for the truth to make it through, then I'm glad you are. And with that, he stood, nodded at Dolores, and disappeared again behind the curtain. Noah let the words wash over him. He didn't trust them yet, but he felt them settle in his chest like a small weight of warmth. The first warmth all day. Dolores stood again, patting his shoulder. If your father's anything like you, she said, then the world's in for a reckoning. He gave her a grateful smile. She walked slowly back to her seat. Behind him, the passengers buzzed in uneasy waves. The slap video had now gone viral. Phones began buzzing across the cabin. News alerts, social posts, texts from family on the ground. In row 4C, a middle-aged man whispered to his wife, Did you see this? He's the son of that climate CEO Solistech. In row 6A, a teenage girl with box braids whispered, He didn't even flinch. That's how strong he is. In row 3D, someone muttered, Just a mistake. Can't ruin someone's life over it. The voices layered, collided, some defensive, some angry, some afraid. But none of them spoke directly to Noah, as if he were a portrait instead of a person. The intercom pinged. Captain Trent Lowe returned with an update. Ladies and gentlemen, we've received instructions to initiate an early descent. We'll be making a scheduled landing at Denver International to allow for personnel changes and a brief delay. Thank you for your patience. The lie sat uncomfortably in the room. Everyone knew. This wasn't about fuel. It was about fallout. Noah closed his eyes again. He wasn't tired in the traditional sense. He was tired of being reduced to a headline, tired of having to represent dignity, tired of being the moment, when all he wanted was to be a young man going to speak on behalf of his future. His phone buzzed. A message from his father. Statement going live in 10. You're not alone. Proud of you. A lump formed in Noah's throat. He typed back, but only managed 3 words. I'm still standing. He hit send, then put the phone down, folded his hands, and looked out the window as Denver's mountains rose like old gods beneath them. Still distant, still waiting. The seatbelt sign blinked on. A soft chime echoed overhead, and the captain's voice came once more, this time more cautious than calm. Ladies and gentlemen, Flight 927 will be making a brief landing at Denver International Airport due to a crew change and technical review. Please remain seated as we taxi to the gate. A murmur rippled through the cabin. Everyone knew. This wasn't about a technical check. This was about a slap. About a boy in seat 2A, about who he was and what had just become visible to the world. Noah Salas stared straight ahead, jaw steady, heart hammering somewhere deep beneath the surface. He could see Denver's lights now, a wash of gold and blue beneath a velvet sky. He knew the moment the wheels touched down, the world would tilt, not because he wanted it to, but because someone else had made it happen, because a hand had moved in reflex, because silence had failed, because truth had gone viral. As the plane taxied toward the gate, phones buzzed up and down the aisle. Some passengers had already seen the video again looped, slowed, captioned. Flight attendant slaps teen in first class turns out. He's a billionaire's son. Teen remains silent. After assault, powerful response goes viral. Noah's face was everywhere now. In the grainy phone footage, his calm expression as the hand made contact, his refusal to retaliate, his decision to stand, not shout. He wasn't a boy anymore. He was a symbol. And symbols come with expectations. A knock on the cockpit door. The captain emerged again. He walked the short distance down the aisle, his face unreadable. "Noah," he said gently, crouching beside the seat. "There's media waiting, not by our doing. Local outlets, some national." It leaked fast. Noah nodded once. Captain Lowe hesitated. "Security will escort you through a separate terminal exit. Your father's legal rep is waiting landside." Another pause. "I just want to say, I saw how you handled this, and if my son grows up with even half your calm, I'll consider myself lucky." Noah offered a quiet, "Thank you." It was sincere, but it wasn't enough to settle the weight inside him. The aircraft doors opened. Cool night air rushed into the cabin like a truth too big to be contained. And then the descent into noise. Noah walked with a steady pace beside Lucia Mendez, his father's legal counsel. She moved like a woman trained in fire-measured steps, blazer sharp, eyes scanning for risk. "Do not stop," she told him. No comments, straight through. But just beyond the tinted glass of the secondary exit, Noah saw the flicker of flashbulbs. He heard reporters shouting his name. He saw signs. "Justice for Noah." "Bias at 35,000 feet." "We believe you." A part of him wanted to turn back, to hide. But another part, the part shaped by his father's quiet strength, stood straighter. He kept walking. In the car, Lucia handed him a bottle of water. "Your father is on a conference line with the airline board. He's made it very clear no settlements. Full transparency." Noah nodded. His voice was quieter than usual. "Do I have to speak?" Lucia hesitated. "You don't have to say anything," she said. "But if you want to." He looked out the window at the terminal, disappearing behind them. Then he whispered, almost to himself, "I just didn't want to be a moment." Lucia looked at him. "Then don't be. Be a movement." By the time they reached the hotel, his phone had over 200 unread messages. Friends, classmates, professors, strangers. Support poured in like waves crashing against a fragile shore. He didn't know how to receive it. He hadn't asked for any of this. He sat at the small desk by the window, overlooking the Denver skyline. Lucia came in, handed him a tablet. This just dropped. It was a joint statement from Skybridge Airlines. "We are aware of the incident involving one of our flight attendants and a young passenger. We have initiated an immediate investigation, placed the crew member on leave, and are reviewing internal policies for racial bias, de-escalation, and passenger rights." Noah read it once. Then again, he felt nothing. Not yet. Words on a screen weren't justice. Later that night, he stood barefoot on the balcony. The cold air cut through his hoodie, but he didn't care. He called his father. Everett answered on the first ring. "I'm proud of you," the man said, voice quiet. "I didn't do anything." Noah replied. "You did everything," Everett said. "You didn't let them define you." There was silence between them. Then Noah asked, "If I hadn't been your son, would this still matter?" Everett's answer came slow. "I don't know," he admitted, "but it does matter. And now, you get to decide how it echoes." The next morning, Noah drafted his own message. Not a tweet, not a post, but a letter to passengers, to witnesses, to the world. He titled it simply, "What You Saw Wasn't Just a Slap." And at the very end, he wrote, "I'm not here to be your headline. I'm here to be your mirror. If you're uncomfortable, look harder." Noah stared at the blinking cursor on his screen. His letter sat in the drafts folder, every word polished, reviewed by Lucia, and reread twice by his father. It wasn't angry. It wasn't a threat. It was truth measured, undeniable, and his. But as his finger hovered over the post button, his breath caught in his throat. Once I do this, I can't go back. He thought of his classmates, his friends, even his future employers. Would they read this and see his humanity, or would they see a problem? Too public to associate with Noah. Shut his laptop, walked to the sink, ran cold water over his hands. The sensation grounded him. He whispered aloud barely above a breath, "If I don't speak now." What was the silence for? And then he posted it. The statement, published at 8:03 was only 784 words long, but it hit like thunder. What happened to me at 36,000 feet wasn't unique. That's the tragedy. What made it headline-worthy was not the slap. It was my father's name. But what if I wasn't his son? What if I were someone no one knew? Someone without access to lawyers, reporters, or trending hashtags? Would you still care? The truth is, this wasn't about air travel. This was about assumption, perception, a system that teaches fear long before it teaches fairness. It trended within minutes. Noah saw a statement, not just as lap. What if he wasn't Mr. Noah had expected support? What he hadn't expected was the divide. Some called it graceful, measured, and a masterclass in dignity. Others dismissed it as performative, elitist, or playing the victim card. A Skybridge spokesperson released a second press note. This one's stiffer. We respect Mr. Solis's right to share his perspective and are committed to ongoing dialogue. It said nothing. The airline was in damage control mode now. Board meetings, legal prep, PR advisors whispering behind closed doors. Meanwhile, Noah sat in his hotel room, reading hundreds of comments. One from a teacher in Boston. "My black students are reading your letter in class today. Thank you for your words." One from an older white man in Michigan. "You're overreacting." The attendant panicked. "Let it go." And another from a 14-year-old girl in Atlanta. "They told me I was too loud last week on a flight. I was just laughing with my cousin. I see you." Noah's eyes blurred with tears. He closed the laptop and buried his face in his hands. This is what it means to be seen. It hurts. Lucia entered quietly with coffee. "You okay?" she asked. Noah looked up, voice raw. "I'm not sure what okay means anymore." Lucia didn't push. She just sat across from him and said, "You've done something powerful, but you don't owe anyone a smile about it." That helped more than she knew. Back at Skybridge headquarters, CEO Donovan Reese was reviewing live analytics when his legal chief entered the room. "He's dismantling us without yelling," the woman muttered. Reese frowned. "We've suspended Lana. We're adjusting bias training protocols. Isn't that enough? Not anymore, she said. People don't want policy tweaks. They want accountability. Reese rubbed his temples. He was a numbers man. He didn't understand culture wars. But his inbox said one thing clearly. Flight 927 wasn't going away. In a classroom at Howard University, Professor Marcia Bell paused her lecture on protest literature and held up her phone. I want you to read something, she told her students, and I want you to ask, what kind of protest is this? The students fell silent as she read Noah's letter aloud. By the end, 3 had tears in their eyes. This is what modern resistance looks like, she said. Not just marching, not just hashtags, but calling the system out, calmly while still bleeding. Back in Denver, Noah sat on the hotel balcony again. The sky was a pale blue, cloudless. The world was noisy now, but up here, it was still quiet. He thought about Lana Bristow, the flight attendant. Where was she now? What was she feeling? Was she being attacked online too? He didn't want revenge. He wanted truth. But the line between those two things often blurred once the public got involved. He pulled out his journal, the same one he'd carried for years. On a blank page, he wrote, I'm not angry she slapped me. I'm angry the world gave her a reason to believe I deserved it. That night, Lucia brought him news. There's been a shift. She said, Congresswoman Raina Ellis is drafting a passenger protection bill. She's using your letter as part of the proposal. Noah blinked. You're telling me? A slap on a plane is changing laws, I'm telling you, Lucia said. You turned pain into pressure. The next morning, Everett called. His voice was tired, but proud. You ready to come home? He asked. Noah hesitated, then said, Not yet. I want to fly commercial, alone. I want to feel what it's like again. Everett didn't argue. He simply said, Then let me know when you land. 3 days after the world read his letter, Noah Salas bought a one-way ticket to Boston in economy class. No security detail. No family name on the manifest. No press. Just Noah, a young man in a navy hoodie and worn backpack, returning to himself. The airport felt louder than usual, or maybe it was him who had changed. He noticed more, the way security eyed a man with darker skin more than others, the way a woman adjusted her purse strap when a teenage boy brushed too close. He didn't judge them. He simply noticed. Once, he might have let those details drift by. Now, they landed. His gate was quiet. Mid-morning flight. Mostly business travelers and college kids. No one seemed to recognize him. Or if they did, no one said anything. He boarded with Group C, tucked his bag into the overhead bin, and took his aisle seat near the back. The plane wasn't full. As passengers filed in, Noah pulled out a small paperback James Baldwin's The Fire Next Time. The words steadied him, and then came the voice. Excuse me, sir. May I see your boarding pass? Noah looked up. A young flight attendant, mid-20s, stood in the aisle. Blonde, nervous. Something flickered in her eyes, a mix of familiarity and caution. He handed over his ticket. She scanned it, then looked back at him. Her cheeks flushed pink. You're sorry, she stammered. You're Noah Salas. Right. He offered a small nod. I just wanted to say, I saw what happened, and I read your letter. I'm training to be a supervisor one day. Your words, they changed how I see everything. Noah blinked. She looked down, fidgeting. I shouldn't have interrupted. Just, thank you. Before he could reply, she moved away. The plane took off quietly. No incident, no whispers, no camera flashes. But halfway through the flight, as the beverage cart neared, An older man across the aisle leaned in. He spoke low, almost like a confession. "My son's in college, too," he said. "Said you were brave. I think he's right." Noah gave him a polite smile, but the word brave still landed strangely. He hadn't fought a war. He hadn't saved a life. He just stood still while someone struck him, and the world noticed. Still, he whispered, "Thank you." Later, as the plane cruised over the Atlantic coastline, turbulence hit, sharp, sudden, the kind that made overhead bins rattle and passengers grip armrests. The young flight attendant, Emily, rushed through the cabin to check belts. She stopped at Noah's row. Their eyes met. "I'm fine," he said, sensing her concern. But then something unexpected happened. She crouched slightly and said, "If anyone ever treats you like that again, I hope I'm there. I'll stand up. I promise." He looked at her, and for the first time in days, he smiled. Genuinely. "Maybe next time. It won't happen at all," he replied. When the plane landed in Boston, Noah stayed back to let others exit. As he stood, he heard a voice behind him. Not a passenger. The captain, a tall middle-aged black man with silver at his temples, walking down the aisle. He offered his hand. "I'm Captain Jerome Fields," he said. "We've never met, but I wanted to say something." Noah shook his hand, curious. "I've flown 30 years, Captain Fields continued. "There were times I had to shrink myself to keep this job, times I didn't speak when I should have. But because of you, my son doesn't have to." Noah felt the emotion press against his ribs. Captain Fields placed a hand on his shoulder. "You made space, son, for all of us." Then he turned and walked back to the cockpit. Outside the terminal, the Boston air was crisp. Noah zipped up his jacket, backpack slung over one shoulder. A young girl, maybe 12, passed by with her mother. She paused mid-step. Her eyes widened. "Are you him?" she whispered. "The one from the plane?" Her mother looked alarmed, but Noah knelt gently, meeting the girl's eyes. "Yes," he said softly, "but I'm also a lot more than that." The girl beamed. "I want to be like you," she said. He smiled. "No," he said gently. "Be more." As they disappeared into the crowd, Noah stood still, just one more traveler in a busy world. And yet, he wasn't invisible anymore, not because he was famous, but because he had chosen to be seen fully, honestly, unapologetically. And now, the world would have to decide what to do with that. Lana Bristow sat in her apartment, curtains drawn, phone silenced, and news notifications off. For the first time in her adult life, she heard the sound of her own breathing. Not the usual shallow, hurried kind. This was different. Slower. Shaky. The airline had put her on indefinite leave. At first, she told herself it was all an overreaction, a misunderstanding. "He startled me," she had thought. I didn't know who he was. But that sentence haunted her. I didn't know who he was. Why had that mattered? Would she have slapped him if he were white? If he wore a suit? If he looked like her nephew? Or her pastor? She didn't want to answer those questions. But now, she had no choice. She rewatched the video once more. Not to dispute it, but to finally see it. She saw the way Noah didn't even raise his voice. How he remained still. How she, the professional, had lost control. Tears slipped down her cheeks. She thought of her own biracial niece. Would someone like her grow up to be treated the same way? She finally whispered to herself, "I have a lot to unlearn." And for the first time, she meant it. "Doctor, Everett Salas stood on his terrace, the early morning fog curling around his coffee cup. His son was in Boston, now quiet, reflective, but safe. Everett had weathered boardrooms, broken systems, even hostile takeovers. But nothing prepared him for the helplessness of watching his child hurt and not being able to stop it. He had once told Noah to keep his head down, to be twice as good for half the credit. Now he regretted that. Because Noah hadn't asked to be anyone's symbol. He had simply existed, and the world had mistaken his presence for a threat. Everett looked out over the city skyline. Noah hadn't lashed out. He hadn't gone to war. He had written, and in that writing, Everett saw something even stronger than power. He saw conviction with restraint, the kind that didn't just change policy, it shifted perspective. Everett picked up his phone, opened a blank note, and typed 5 words. He never thought he'd write. My son taught me courage. Lucia Mendez flipped through printouts in a small cafe off DuPont Circle. Articles, op-eds, screenshots of support groups, protest flyers, new FAA policy drafts. Noah's story had grown legs-long ones. In legal terms, she had expected a settlement, maybe a lawsuit, some backroom apology. Instead, she had watched a young man write a letter that shook an industry. What made it powerful wasn't its anger, it was its clarity, its refusal to demand revenge, its insistence on being seen without needing to perform pain. Lucia folded the papers. This wasn't just a case. This was a blueprint. She whispered into her coffee. He didn't just win. He rewrote the rules. Marcus Troy, the young flight attendant, stood in a Skybridge training room weeks later, eyes scanning a crowd of new recruits. He hadn't intended to become a speaker, but after submitting his witness statement, the airline had asked him to help reshape its training around bias and escalation. He looked at the 20 faces before him, different shades, different lives, all trying to learn how to treat strangers with care. Marcus spoke slowly. We were taught how to de-escalate when passengers act up, but nobody taught us how to de-escalate ourselves. He paused. Noah Salas did that. Without raising a hand, silence followed. And for once, it wasn't awkward. It was reverent. In a middle school classroom in Chicago, a teacher wrote on the board Perception versus Reality, the case of Noah Salas. She turned to her students, mostly black and brown kids, and asked, "How many of you have ever been treated like you didn't belong?" Every hand rose. She nodded. Today, we're going to talk about what happens when someone stands tall, not by yelling, but by not shrinking. They opened their copies of Noah's letter. A boy in the back whispered, "He's like me." And that was the beginning of something bigger than the lesson plan. Captain Jerome Fields read the latest policy updates from Skybridge Airlines. Clearer passenger protocols, racial bias evaluations, emergency mediation guidelines. Some of it was corporate gloss, but not all. He had seen change before on paper. This time, it felt different, because it wasn't just lawyers who wrote the reforms. It was a 19-year-old who refused to let silence swallow him. Jerome nodded quietly to himself. A new kind of sky was coming. And finally, there might be room for everyone. Emily Harlan sat at her mother's kitchen table, retelling every detail of the second flight, the one where she met Noah face to face. I was terrified, she admitted, not of him, of messing up. Her mom poured tea, smiling gently. And what did he say Emily thought for a moment? He told a little girl to be more than him. Her voice cracked. I think that changed me. Noah Salas Meanwhile, sat in a campus library weeks later, headphones in, hoodie up, watching students walk by unaware. He liked it that way. The noise had died down. The news cycle moved on. But something had settled inside him, something quiet and rooted. He no longer needed to prove anything. He wasn't trying to lead. He wasn't trying to inspire. He was simply trying to live fully without apology. And in that decision, he had learned the final lesson. You don't have to burn to shine. Sometimes, you just have to stand still and let others see their reflection in your light. The sky was clear, blue like brushed silk. Noah Salas sat on a bench near Boston Common. Hoodie pulled over his ears, eyes tracking the movement of people beneath trees shedding their spring skin. He wasn't thinking about cameras, or lawsuits, or press releases. He was thinking about a simple question that had haunted him quietly since the day everything unraveled at 36,000 feet. Now that they're listening, what do I say next? It was one thing to speak up once. It was another to keep going, not out of obligation, but out of belief. Noah had no interest in being a permanent headline, but maybe he could be a starting point. He pulled out his notebook, the one with the frayed edges, the corner coffee stain, and 100 half-finished thoughts inside. He flipped to a blank page, wrote in block letters across the top, "We don't just need safer skies. We need wider ones." Later that evening, Noah took a call from Lucia Mendez, who was still in DDs, working with lawmakers to push through the Passenger Equity Act legislation inspired by his case. "They're trying to bury parts of it in committee," she said. "We're fighting." "I know," Noah replied quietly, "and I'm proud of you." Lucia hesitated, then said, "You do realize you've become the voice of something much bigger than one flight." "Right," Noah exhaled. "I don't want to be a symbol." Lucia chuckled. "You're not. You're a mirror." People saw themselves, both the brave and the biased. In his inbox were new messages every day. Letters from strangers. A woman who'd been kicked off a flight in 1992 and told no one would believe her. A young flight attendant in training, writing, "Your story is required reading for us now." A father who wrote, "My son thought crying made him weak. After reading about you, he knows better." Noah read everyone. He didn't always know how to respond, but he carried each word like a pebble in his pocket, weighty, grounding, real. One weekend, he returned home to New York, slipping into the back of a community town hall where his father, Dr. Everett Salas, had agreed to speak. Everett, ever polished, began as expected statistics, industry data, the need for inclusive training. But then he paused, looked out at the audience, and said, "I used to tell my son to work twice as hard to be seen as half as threatening, that if he stayed quiet, he'd stay safe." He took a breath. "I was wrong." Gasps. Silence. Everett's voice softened. "My son didn't raise his voice. He raised a mirror, and it showed us who we still are and who we could be." Noah felt heat rise in his chest. Not pride, something deeper. Forgiveness. Outside the building, a small group of teenagers stopped him. "Can we get a picture?" one asked. He almost said no. Then he saw the hope in their faces. Not fan energy recognition. He nodded. Afterward, one girl asked, "Do you still fly?" He smiled. "Yeah," he said, "because I don't run from the sky. I remind it who I am." Spring turned to early summer. The world, as always, moved on. There was another viral video, another controversy, a different flight. But Noah didn't disappear. He didn't perform either. He gave guest lectures in high schools, He joined a transportation advisory board as a youth representative. He partnered with Emily Harlan and Marcus Troy to create new onboard training simulations, this time rooted in lived experience. Skybridge Airlines invited him to consult on their first real anti-bias curriculum. He agreed, but only on one condition. It must include voices that don't come with billion-dollar last names. They listened, and for the first time in a long time, so did the sky. One night, sitting at a window seat on another routine flight somewhere over Cleveland, Noah stared out at the clouds. He thought of Flight 927, of Lana Bristow, of his mother's softness, his father's fire, of Captain Field's hand on his shoulder, and a little girl whispering, "I want to be like you." And he whispered back, "To no one but the stars, I want to be like her too, fearless." Because that was what this journey had taught him, to not just stand still in the face of injustice, but to move forward without bitterness, to ask not just what was done to me, but what can be built from here. What they built was messy, imperfect, in progress, but it was something. And in a world constantly racing for noise, headlines, outraged Noah solace gave them something rare, a stillness that spoke, a truth that resonated, and a question that would not go away. If a single young man can shift the air at 36,000 feet, what else might we change if we finally looked each other in the eyes? Some stories scream, others whisper, and never leave you. Noah Solace didn't raise his voice. He didn't demand revenge. He asked a question, one that echoed across boardrooms, classrooms, and living rooms around the world. And in doing so, he reminded us of something so simple, and yet so easy to forget. Everyone deserves to fly without fear. Everyone deserves to be seen without judgment. Everyone deserves to belong. This story wasn't just about a slap it was about a mirror, one that showed us who we are when no one is watching, and who we could become if we dared to listen. Discrimination doesn't always shout. Sometimes it's a gesture, a look, an assumption, and justice. It doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's a calm voice that says, "This isn't right." If this story moved you, if it made you feel, question, or reflect, then let's keep this conversation flying. Hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to our channel for more stories that challenge, inspire, and connect. We'll be back soon with more stories that take flight in ways the world never expects. See you in the next episode.